The Last of Us is one of the best games of the last decade, and a game that didn't really demand a sequel, because its story was satisfying enough because of how complete and self-contained it is. But the fans wanted one, and I'm sad to say that it should never have happened. The Last of Us Part 2 kicks off a few years after the events of the first game, and starts off slow, showing that Joel and Ellie's life has returned to some normalcy in spite of the pandemic. We see a very lived-in and beautiful Jackson. Games often offer players choices on what they can do, and that's why more and more games have multiple endings. But Part 2 doesn't offer any such choice, leading to the most realized and specific depiction of its characters. Players are asked to accept the characters as is, and much like real life, these characters cannot be classified as good or bad. This leads to the most realistic and well-defined characters in gaming. Both Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson return to give honest and genuine performances. Also, great side performances like Shannon Woodward's Dina and Stephen Chang's Jesse win gamers' hearts instantly. Laura Bailey's Abby is also one of the standout performances of the game. Combat has also seen the addition of some great mechanics to introduce variety and not have the repetitive gameplay that the first game did. Both on the human and the infected end, melee combat in general has been improved a lot. Fighting a runner is no longer just an affair of mashing the square button, and melee combat with much larger human enemies is more satisfying. I know how weird it sounds that adding a dodge button in 2020 feels fresh, but it does. This makes for great mini boss fights in between a huge combat sequence. Other than those new features, the combat feels very familiar to the last game, which is actually a good thing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, but you can make it better, which they have done here. Ellie is no longer the relatively frail girl she was in the first game. She has increased her strength and polished her skills and kicks much more ass than she did in the first game. She is also very agile, which helps in stealth elements of the game. Resources are also scarce, even more rare than the first game, and I often found myself going into an enemy camp without sufficient resources, or being shot at from all directions without a medkit and ammo. This means that stealth is important, and also if you are a squeamish person, then the non-lethal route is the way to go. Because if you go the lethal route, then you can hear your enemies' blood-curdling screams as they die, or hear them drowning in their own blood.
Don't make a fucking sound. Hands up.
Easy. Easy.
Do you know a girl named Nora?
Sure, yeah.
Where is she?
In the hospital.
Where in the hospital?
Yeah, they're clearing out the upper floors. She's somewhere in there.
That was dumb.
Being stealthy is easier said than done. Both human and infected enemies can now detect you more easily, and humans no longer just stand there looking in one direction. When feeling threatened, they look all around them, which makes staying hidden much more harder. They will also be on guard when finding a corpse of their fellow soldiers, and actively look behind cars and under trucks to find you. This, in addition with dogs that can track you by your scent, means that you have to always keep moving, and this makes for really harrowing and thrilling stealth action gameplay. Infected like stalkers will actually hide from you and attack you from unseen angles, or attack you in groups. And although you can engage in melee combat with them, they will kick your ass. Runners like before are easy to deal with, and clickers can now be taken down when in stealth without the need of shifts when playing as Ellie. Shamblers are a new addition to the infected roster, and bloaters also make a comeback.
Get off of me!
There's also a boss fight involving whatever this thing is. Although individually, infected are easy to deal with, but when you have to fight a combination of these and kill them in different ways, it can really be challenging and test your skill. The places where these combat sequences take place are very well defined and offer a multitude of options on how to tackle your foes. They are either on a multi-level skyscraper, a dilapidated building, or a well laid out urban neighborhood. These are important in keeping combat encounters interesting, surprising, and thrilling. The fear of being caught and then being shot at from 10 highly trained foes while you have 2 bullets and 1 arrow left in your arsenal is like no other. Boss fights with bloaters and whatever this thing is take place in open but confined places, which means there is always an imminent threat from them. Another new addition to the gameplay are wild infected chases, where herds of infected from all sides come flowing in trying to get the player. This makes very thrilling and memorable action sequences of the game. Perhaps the first thing that you notice once you start playing part 2 is how good it looks. The lighting, the environment, the character avatars all look beautiful and are extremely detailed. Every room that you walk into tells a different story and feels like it's frozen in time. It feels like someone actually lived there before the outbreak, and environments are dense with details. It also has a semi-open world, Uncharted Lost Legacy-like environment that rewards exploration, though that can pad the runtime significantly in a game that already has some pacing issues. I was amazed by how good the game looks and runs, even on a launch PS4. I played the entire game on a PS4 Slim and didn't come across a single stutter or a single dropped frame. I was amazed by how well optimized the game was. I guess that's an advantage of being a first party title. Alright guys, that is the end of the spoiler free section of the review. From this point there are major spoilers for the game. And if you don't want spoilers, please subscribe and leave. So The Last of Us Part 2 is a game that has exceptional gameplay, great combat, well realized characters and beautiful environments. So why do I say that it never should have happened? That's because of the problematic story. The story of Part 2 kicks off few years after the first game and starts out slow. It shows how Joel and Ellie's life has returned to normalcy after the long adventure in the last game. Like the first game, players enter a world ravaged by mindless creatures, and to survive, humans have formed small groups among themselves who don't trust strangers and fight together for mutual protection. The game starts slow to fill players in on how Joel and Ellie's life is like in Jackson. They show how both of them have bonded even more during the time they spent together. But all the good life and happiness is killed the next day, as a new character named Abby ambushes Joel and Tommy and brutally murders Joel in front of Ellie while Ellie is powerless to do anything to save her father figure. This immediately sets the tone of revenge and suffering in the game. So before I trash the story, let's look at the good parts. Firstly, I think the 2 different perspectives shown in the game was a good idea, but it was implemented terribly. Showing us the aftermath of the rampant killing took on by Ellie to exact her revenge from the perspective of Abby was a good idea. And players already know the bond between Ellie and Joel, and how Ellie is justified in her actions. It really gets the players thinking on questions like morality, and the game even makes you do things that you don't want to do, like brutally stabbing a dog or killing an unarmed person that has surrendered and is begging for mercy. This really gets gamers thinking if Ellie is actually the bad person in this game. The game relies heavily on flashbacks to fill in the story between the games. And though most flashbacks severely hurt the pacing of the game, the flashbacks between Joel and Ellie provide for the most heartwarming and memorable moments of the game. Like how Ellie just had to find out about what happened with the Fireflies, so much so that she sneaked off to the hospital alone. And perhaps the most emotional flashback is one in the end, when Joel tells Ellie that he would have done it all over again just to save her life. And then Ellie says she will try to forgive Joel for what he did. With the knowledge of Joel's death, these moments provide for the most tear-jerking and heartwarming moments of the game.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
Yeah. I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
I'd like that.
Okay. I'll see you around.
Yep.
Now let's look at the bad. With part 2, Naughty Dog had a big task ahead of them to make a sequel to a near perfect game. After Joel's death, the scene is set for a Taken or John Wick like revenge tale. And the first 10 or so hours of the game highlights Ellie's quest for revenge, to kill everyone associated with Joel's death. But this revenge just doesn't feel satisfactory enough, owing to the game just dragging on without any developments in the main story. And also because Tommy already sets off ahead of you, taking his revenge, preventing Ellie to take hers. After killing all of the people associated with Joel's death and not seeing Abby for a large part of the game, Ellie and Abby finally come face to face. But then the game does a complete pivot and shows the days that Ellie spent killing Abby's friends from Abby's perspective. This actually would have been a great tool to the storytelling if it would have been implemented properly. At this point, the game just goes into snoozeville and the pacing of the game takes a hit. Then we are shown numerous flashbacks as Abby, even showing a flashback within a flashback. And as a player, I just didn't care what Abby was up to 3 or 4 years earlier, because I just don't relate with Abby, and this felt like a big misstep by Naughty Dog. Because players want to play as the hero, someone they love, someone they can relate to. And I'm afraid to say, Naughty Dog just doesn't do a convincing enough job for me to take Abby's side. Also, a large part of Abby's side of the game is a giant side quest to help a stranger that does nothing to advance the plot of the game. And the player starts thinking, why am I even playing this? After Abby's side of the game started, I found it more difficult to come back to the game. And then there is the confusing ending, which just doesn't make sense because players know the motivations of Ellie and how Joel's death has affected her, and the game actually does a good job of showing the aftermath of Joel's death. Then why the hell, after slaying numerous guys that didn't even have anything to do with the feud between Ellie and Abby, why would Ellie let Abby go? It just doesn't make sense. Another thing lacking from the story is depth. The first game had the depth of how Joel was coping with his daughter's death, and how Joel had a second chance of being a father figure for Ellie, and how humanity had a hope of redemption due to an immune girl. All of this, along with the apocalyptic background, added real depth to the first game, and that's what made it so great. But the second game lacks this sort of depth, and instead raises questions based on morality that it never answers. This, along with poor storytelling and a story that just doesn't make sense, really plagues an otherwise fantastic game. The verdict. The Last of Us Part 2 is a technical masterpiece that features intuitive gameplay, beautiful, distinct environments, outstanding performances by the cast, and some of the best graphics of the generation. But it is let down due to its lengthy, slow, and at times confusing story, along with an attempt to make an overambitious story and an ending that just doesn't make sense. The story of The Last of Us is just not good enough as the first game. And I'm sad to say the game feels more like a cash grab or a setup for another sequel. Bad storytelling really hurts a single player game like this one, where story and storytelling is paramount. I tried so hard to like the story of the game because I absolutely loved the prequel, but I couldn't. If this was a standalone game, then it may have been a great experience. And I can't believe I'm saying this about a Naughty Dog game, but it is a sequel that leaves a bad taste in the mouth of the fans of the original game. And that's why it gets a score of 6.8 out of 10. For more things The Last of Us and everything about gaming and tech, don't forget to subscribe to the Broke Gaming Company. And I'll see you in the next one.